Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got something a little different today. We are unpacking a brief, but man, an incredibly provocative piece of philosophy. It's the kind of excerpt that really forces us to take a hard look at human nature, right? It challenges those completely standard assumptions we all have about how individual rights are actually lost. The source material here literally pulls no punches, so definitely keep an open mind as we dive in.
Okay, let's dive into this. Right out of the gate, the text hits us with this incredibly bold thesis. Freedom is given away by weak people. Boom. It immediately hooks your attention, doesn't it? And it just completely upends that traditional narrative we are so used to hearing. Instead of framing the loss of liberty as this grand tragedy inflicted upon the innocent, the text kicks off with a blunt, controversial premise that squarely points the finger right back at the individual. So let's break down exactly what the author means by this.
Section 1. How Freedom is Lost, the Unseen Surrender.
To truly grasp the author's core premise here, we have to recognize that the text is actually asking us to look away from the battlefield and instead look inward. The primary assertion is that freedom is not some physical object aggressively stolen from us in the dark of night. We always picture this dramatic heist, right? A forceful removal of our rights by some big outside adversary. But the text explicitly shuts that line of thinking down. It insists that the removal of our autonomy is absolutely not an act of theft committed against an unwilling victim.
Instead, the source places the responsibility entirely on the shoulders of the individual. It is given away. By using those exact words, the author basically transforms the loss of freedom from a hostile takeover into a voluntary transaction. It's a willing forfeiture. You aren't being robbed, you are literally handing over the keys.
But wait, who is actually handing over those keys? Well, the text uses a very specific, highly provocative term. Weak people. Now, it's really important to understand exactly how the author categorizes this. The source isn't describing like a lack of physical strength, they're not hitting the gym. Rather, it's a targeted description for individuals who lack the internal fortitude to hold on to their own autonomy. It's entirely a psychological or moral categorization applied directly to those who voluntarily choose to surrender their own freedom.
Moving on to Section 2, The Myth of Dictators, Rethinking the Threat.
To really comprehend the sheer weight of this argument, we have to look at what the author entirely rejects. Because if the threat isn't coming from where we usually think it's coming from, well then our entire defensive posture is wrong. And this brilliantly illustrates that core contrast. We have the traditional fear of liberty being taken away by some dictator on one side versus the author's reality of it being given up by weak people on the other. The text creates this direct opposition between the external threat we constantly fear, the tyrant, the authoritarian, and the internal surrender that the author claims is the actual mechanism of our downfall.
Just look at this exact sentence from the text. Our freedom will not be taken away by some dictator. Notice the absolute certainty in that phrasing. The author doesn't say it might not happen or it's unlikely. They state will not, definitively dismissing that whole traditional narrative of tyranny. The source strongly implies that waiting around for a classic textbook dictator to arrive and snatch our rights is just a total distraction. The real danger, according to this text anyway, is far less cinematic and honestly, far more insidious.
Which brings us to our final section, the price of surrender, the currency of autonomy.
So if we aren't being conquered by dictators, what on earth could possibly motivate someone to make that trade? What is the actual currency being used to buy our liberty? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the fascinating list of motivations the text provides: an immediate sense of pride, safety, instant pleasures, short-term happiness, and meeting low-value desires. These are the specific things we are supposedly trading our freedom for. They aren't these grand historical ideals. No, they are surprisingly mundane, everyday comforts. The author argues that it is the quiet lure of these basic, immediate gratifications that ultimately unravels our autonomy. Let's examine these a bit closer. First up, the text isolates an immediate sense of pride and safety. The source directly links our most basic human needs, our ego and our desire for security, to the voluntary surrender of our freedom. It suggests that, when faced with a choice between the difficult, demanding nature of true liberty and the warm, comforting blanket of feeling safe and validated right in this very moment, people will choose the latter. They will hand over their freedom just to feel secure.
The author also points heavily to instant pleasures and short-term happiness. Notice the repetition of those time-based adjectives: instant, short-term. The text is drawing a razor-sharp contrast between fleeting, temporary gratification and the enduring, long-lasting nature of true liberty. The big implication here is that maintaining freedom requires a long-term vision. It requires patience, delayed gratification, qualities that the text suggests are just abandoned in favor of a quick fix of happiness.
And finally, we arrive at the author's concluding phrase, low-value desires. Now, this is a really fascinating categorization. The source is taking our everyday wants, our modern conveniences, those tiny little comforts we constantly seek out, and explicitly labeling them as vastly inferior to true freedom. The text essentially suggests we're making a terrible bargain. We're trading something totally priceless for something cheap.
When we put it all together, the source presents a really stark, almost unyielding view of human vulnerability. So the crucial point is, as the text plainly states, freedom and autonomy will be given up. Our autonomy isn't lost in some grand battle against a tyrant. No, it is quietly, willingly sacrificed right at the altar of comfort, safety, and instant gratification.
We've explored the author's premise from every angle today, looking at exactly how the text defines this unseen surrender and the surprisingly mundane price of our liberty. But, the real power of an explainer like this isn't just in understanding the text, it's in applying it. So I want to leave you with this final, incredibly vital question to ponder based on everything we've covered. Look at your own daily choices. Look at the conveniences you rely on and the security you seek out. Are we currently trading our autonomy for instant pleasure? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Take some time to really think about that question, and I'll see you next time.